Attention! The Hub's done some reconnaissance on these here interwebs and come back with this assembly of the most disciplined armies in the world. Although the United States is a pretty hefty global superpower, there are other formidable forces defending their homelands across this world, and we're gonna see them all. So pick yourself up by your bootstraps and let's march through these lines of men and women leading their country's military might. We are very excited to announce the Premium Network. The Premium gets you early access to videos from The Richest, Screen Rant, The Taco, The Sportster, The Things, and many other great channels. Literally thousands of videos in one place with ad-free browsing. Check out the Premium by clicking this link. Sign up for free and start binge watching videos from your favorite channels. While you're at it, set your sights on the subscribe button to see all the interesting videos in the Hub's arsenal. China. While the People's Liberation Army has been under fire in the past due to corruption among the military ranks and the government offices that feed it, the sheer size of this ground force is incomparable to any other. With the largest standing army of any nation and a budget of $41.6 billion, China has invested a lot in their military's future. This ramp-up makes sense considering their recent drills in the South China Sea and the disputes over territory that have arisen in the area. Serving in the army at some point and in some capacity is a requirement for all citizens in China, usually 2-year terms, and with a group that large, it's hard to strive for perfection among all soldiers. Yet, China is investing so much in creating sustainable armed personnel that the education and training of the Chinese fighters are comparable to what's offered in the United States. Their equipment and supplies are also catching up to the US. Experts say that by 2020, China's machinery will be in line with the type of technology the US was using in 2000. While a 20-year difference seems extreme, the US has not modernized much over the past few decades. United States. Nothing speaks better to the discipline of the United States military than the organization of boot camp. Stereotypically, we often associate boot camp with images from the movies, of new recruits scrubbing the floors with toothbrushes and doing push-ups in the mud. But there's more to it than that. With 1.4 million active duty soldiers and $601 billion aligned for military funding, more than the next 9 highest spending countries combined, their investment in the nation's defenses is exemplified in everything from the high-tech weaponry to the intense training period. Basic training is a fully immersive experience, with classroom instruction mixed with grueling physical activities, leading to marksmanship training and simulated combat situations, culminating in the basic rifle marksmanship qualification course and the Fit to Win obstacle course midway through boot camp. The second half of basic training finds soldiers working with their platoon and finding that their competitive edge is only as sharp as the weakest in their team. After about 3 months of work, boot camp culminates in a 3-day field retreat. It's the final test, and once one passes, they become a US soldier. Following this, specialized training and leadership schools are offered for soldiers as a means to move through the ranks. Russia. With over 766,000 active soldiers, Russia manages the second most powerful army in the world, just behind the US. With their amount of aircraft and submarines, they have the largest amount of tanks of any military out there. With all that technology, training for incoming soldiers is still a tough ordeal. New recruits are often given clean clothes once per week, and they're allowed to bathe once per week as well. Since Russia covers much landmass and extends far north, many military installations and bases are in cold climates with sub-zero temperatures, and training requires their soldiers to learn to survive in these elements. Imagine the workout you'd have to endure in an outpost in Siberia that would harden anyone into a man of steel. Outside of the standards faced by adult members of the military, Russian President Vladimir Putin recently revived an old program which provides full-time military training for teenagers. In it, kids, some even as old as 11 years old, are given lessons on survival, military strategy, weapons assembly, and religious instruction. It's an odd mix that breeds young and disciplined citizens whose obvious next step is to join the military when they're old enough. India. After several wars and generally tense relationships with Pakistan, India has been a developing power throughout the latter half of the 20th and early 21st centuries. In competing with Pakistan, which itself has a very well-trained arsenal of soldiers, India's put together an army of nearly 1.2 million soldiers, practicing what they call unity with diversity. Matching the differing creeds of their huge population, their ranks include a united front of Muslim, Sikhs, Hindus, Christians, and Parsis. They also believe in a unity of different studies for their officers, providing instruction in not just strategy, but also boxing, polo, sailing, music, astronomy, and other artistic pursuits. Aiming to create well-rounded and accepting individuals to protect their diverse society, the army teaches their recruits to protect their country first, then their neighbors, and then themselves. Due to India's many differing beliefs and cultures, as well as the natural disasters that have occurred in the Asian subcontinent over time, the army has regularly been called upon to serve the population during these internal crises. These These orderly soldiers set a great example of a life that could be offered to the young and less fortunate. As more citizens see effective soldiers in action, the number of India's army will likely increase tenfold. North Korea. The West has been at odds with North Korea for over half a century, and their isolated stance has forced them to look inward when breeding their own personal fighting force. With a culture that nearly worships their leader, the North Koreans live a life that's entirely dedicated to the state. Naturally, this mindset creates soldiers who will defend their country to the end, even before any kind of basic training would begin. Although their technology is in sore need of an update, they spent a fourth of their gross domestic product on their military. At 1,020,000 strong, the fighters of this small Asian nation are dedicated for life, even if food and resources are in short supply. They still have around 4,000 tanks, 21,000 pieces of artillery, and a willingness to defend their cause. After living an entire life in a closed-off society which views their supreme leader as infallible, lacking the funds to compete head-on with the technology of their neighbors, North Korea developed creative means to protect themselves, including a more effective brand of stealth paint to conceal targets, laser weapons meant to distract and confuse enemies, and tiny submarines called human torpedoes. Obviously, they know how to make the most out of their lesser means. South Korea. Just as the North Korean army is driven by its dedication to its despotic leader, South Korea is primarily driven by its desire to stay free from the North's communist dictatorship. Propped up by Western democracies, the South Korean government has received much aid from the United States, and its technology is far superior to what South Korea relies on. However, their soldiers are the real story, with a slogan stating, "If anyone could be a Marine, I'd never have joined." Their whole military is full of top-shelf athletic combatants. Although the military requires a 21-month conscription from all able-bodied citizens, the best of the best are given fierce training and featured positions. With new recruits coming in every 2 weeks, the South Korean soldiers have a strong class structure dividing young and old, in which newer soldiers give deference to older soldiers and strive to work their way up the ranks. The best way for them to gain respect is to prove themselves in training missions and harsh exercises which see soldiers running shirtless through snowy weather and completing other tough physical acts. With only half the amount of infantry as North Korea and 2/3 of their tanks, they need as tough training as possible to defend themselves from aggression from above. France. Of all the nations of Europe, France is likely to become the most effective fighting force over the next 15 years thanks to its complex networks of communications and command centers, which is relied upon heavily by the European Union. Most importantly, its army has been a regular participant in the War on Terror, with special forces and standard infantry engaged in North Africa and Afghanistan since the start of the 21st century. By regularly deploying units into countries as a means to fight extremism, their soldiers have regular on-the-job training. If selected for the Special Operations Force, these elite individuals are given complex hand-to-hand combat training, rappel from tall surfaces, operate while carrying heavy equipment, and several psychological tests over a 2 to 3 year period before they're ready for duty. With this in mind, for the first time in modern history, France rated higher than the UK global ranking of powers by the Global Firepower Index. At 202,000 active duty members, their army is certainly smaller than others on this list, but they can pool their resources with other NATO allies and have enough well-trained members that their army's size is proportionate to their country. Britain. Although it's recently been ranked lower than the French army, the British military can still be called upon to take care of its queen and country. When it was an imperial power in the 19th and early 20th centuries, Britain bragged that the sun never set on it thanks to its territories around the world. Now that its might is mostly confined to the United Kingdom, doesn't make it any less impressive. Operating under the regimental system, their regiments are age-old institutions with a history that inspires loyalty and dedication from its members. If you can believe it, the oldest regiment still in existence was established as far back as 1337. To join the military, new recruits undergo several phases of physical training in the field and strategic training in the classroom to make sure they're ready to fight, with the opportunity to train to be Army-affiliated engineers, weapons specialists, or pilots. All soldiers are expected to follow the British Army's values and standards, a formal document listing the expectations of enlisted fighters. According to them, discipline is the primary antidote to fear. It is supported by team loyalty, trust, and professionalism. The British Army will not force discipline on its soldiers. It expects them to be able to impose the necessary discipline on themselves. Italy. For generations, Italy's landscape was split into many different city-states, and it wasn't until the entire country was unified that a single standing army was created for the whole nation. After defeat in World War II, the Italian army needed some time to rebuild its reputation. Now it ranks among the top 10 strongest militaries in the world, thanks to a $34 million budget and a pool of 320,000 active soldiers. Although it has not engaged in a full-scale war since the 1940s, Italian special forces have fought with other well-trained troops in the War on Terror. Despite Despite the lack of recent hot conflicts under the Italian military's belt, the country ranks third in nations lending the most forces towards peacekeeping operations. It's an honorable title that could only be held by fully disciplined fighters. Of all their troops, however, the Alpini, or Alpine Corps, are the finest. As the world's oldest mountain-based fighting unit, they have high-altitude experience and extensive training in mountain climbing, although their elite status has allowed them to be embedded in other terrains internationally. Different Alpini units can best be told apart by the different songs they sing, passed down from fighter to fighter and generation to generation. Taiwan. This small island off the coast of China doesn't seem like it could compete with the massive force of the mainland, but its geographic situation has toughened its people into one of the strongest armies around. Taiwan's training is particularly grueling because it makes hard soldiers. Take the exercise they call the Road to Heaven. They're not just putting a card up against your face to check your posture. They're adjusting your whole body by forcing you to roll across piles of rough rocks. If you were looking to join Taiwan's amphibious unit, you would complete your 10-week training process by dragging yourself across 164 feet of coral rocks with your hands tied behind your back. Standing upright, you fall vertically forward, landing on your elbows in a plank. Then you must crawl over the rocks on your elbows and knees, stopping every so often for ab exercises or some other activity made ungodly when forced to happen on a sharp and craggy path. And if the supervisor isn't happy with your performance, he'll order you to start again. As the saying goes, pain is temporary, but being in Taiwan's military is forever. Although they're heroes of many books, movies, and television shows, being a soldier is a very hard job, but somebody's gotta do it. With all these military forces defending their countries, hopefully you can sleep better at night knowing that your army has your back. In addition to giving their lives to a cause they believe in, maybe these soldiers can also take some solace in knowing that they're part of the most disciplined armies in the world. Thanks for joining The Hub. We'll see you next time.